The subject of redemption is an interesting one. And it's interesting because we can look at it from two different ways. There's a way that Paul has presented it to us, and then there's a way that these scriptures have unveiled it. We've gone through and we've seen Paul's type of redemption. A redemption that in the book of John, we can see where that kind of origin would be drawn from. But the Bible has a routine of its own. The Bible has an understanding of its own. The Bible has a concept of its own. And that concept we can find perfectly demonstrated and illustrated as seen in the book of Galatians 3:13 by the crucifixion of the living God's chief apostle, what that man's physical body represents. What that man's physical body represents. Which in that same verse is a quote taken from the book of Deuteronomy. Now, the author's putting that quote in there wonderfully. Because if he that is hanged is accursed of God, then what that body represents is an accursed thing. To literally have that body be a representative of salvation does not fit with the underlying philosophy that is within the scriptures. He that is hanged is accursed. If you're worshiping the one that is hanged, you're worshiping one that is accursed. Your religion is going nowhere. Your salvation is actually turned upside down. That's very plain. That's very plain. And that kind of disturbs the Christian theory in a complete sense. But what the author of the book of Galatians does is they look at that body figuratively as it ought to be looked and seen as. The flesh there, the body there, hanging and crucified, represents a religious philosophy, which is why it says Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law. That body there hanging represents the philosophy of the religious law. Redemption is from the philosophy, from the scope, from the ideology, from the routine and practice that hinges on the code of Moses. And as a previous episode, I'm not singling out Moses individually. I'm singling out the code that Moses practiced and gave, and that is still continued today by the Jewish type religions. That is what's crucified. And that is what the conversation needs to find redemption from. Hence the illustration of that body crucified. And hence, Galatians 3:13, Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law, for it is written, he that is hanged is accursed of God. It's not literal, it's allegorical. And so looking in the book of Psalm 51 and verse 4, Psalm 51 and verse 5, behold, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Now, this me and this what was shapen and this mother, it is not literal, it is, again, allegorical. It is figurative. The issue at hand, if in this same psalm, thou desirest truth in the inward parts, and in the hidden parts thou shalt make me to know wisdom. The issue at hand isn't anything that has to do with a natural body, but with a body of understanding. This is the devotional body. This is the body of belief. And it is the body of belief that was shapen by its mother. And this mother, Galatians 4:26, just again, this one verse, Galatians 4:26, where it's highlighting, but Jerusalem, which is above, which is the mother of us all. So this is figurative language. And the mother here that the author of the book of Galatians is pointing to is not a literal woman. This is an institutional mind. And an institutional mind, again, not literal. This is an experience. The experience is the institution. The experience is the invisible institution, giving birth to the conversation from the classroom above. And again, all this is allegorical and figurative. Above meaning without the religious world, or the concept of the religious world, or the character of the religious world involved and being engaged with. So our conversation is naturally shaped in error by or from our mother, and not the mother from above, because if we're going to maintain that principle of below and above and the division that traditional religious theory holds of good and evil, what is above is without error. What is below is with error. What is above is without error, but what is below is with error. And this is where our conversation is conceived in that realm known as the religious world. Now, in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 7, Ecclesiastes chapter 7 and verse 20, Ecclesiastes chapter 7 and verse 20, it reads, "There is not a just man upon earth that doeth good and sinneth not." Now, we may read this, we may think of this as something normal, general, nobody's without error, and, that kind of moral type ideology. That's not really what this is talking about. The entire book of Ecclesiastes, from the first chapter to the last, is about an author writing about their experience, putting into practice the philosophy and the mannerisms of the devotional character of priests that are under the sun. Figurative language, under the sun, or that are within the religious world. So the author of the book of Ecclesiastes meaning or translating to mean scorn. The individual here is writing of an attitude of one scorned, because he's given up his intelligence, and he's given up his character to the intelligence and to the character that is within the religious world. And all that he sees, he's reporting. And what he's reporting is that there's none that does good on the earth. So this isn't about a natural individual. This isn't about somebody just living their life and writing what they see in a natural way. This is an individual devoting their time to understanding how particular individuals, particular priesthoods, particular priests, particular ministers within the religious world get down. Ecclesiastes 8, 16 and 17. Ecclesiastes 8, 16 and 17. What does it mean that none doeth good upon the earth? What is this earth? Ecclesiastes 8, 16 and 17. "When I applied mine heart to know wisdom, and to see the business that is done upon the earth, for also there is that neither day nor night he sleep with his eyes, then I beheld the work of God, that a man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun." This term earth is broken down. There is a particular business that is conducted on earth, or as it says, under the sun. There's a particular work, there's a particular business that takes place. Ecclesiastes 1:13. Ecclesiastes 1 and verse 13. "And I gave my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom concerning all things that are done under heaven. This sore travail hath God given to the sons of man to be exercised therewith." Earth comes with a specific travail. What is under the sun comes with a specific travail. What is within the earth, what is under the sun, is a specific business of travail. What is this? Ecclesiastes 3, 10 and 11. Ecclesiastes 3, 10 and 11. "I have seen the travail which God hath given to the sons of men to be exercised in it. He hath made everything beautiful in his time. Also he hath set the world in their heart, so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end." Now remember, Ecclesiastes 8, the author is letting us know that a man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. Ecclesiastes 3 tells us the answer of why that is. The answer is because the business that's going on in the earth, the business that's going on under the sun, the business and the travail that's going on under the heaven is a business and is a travail of where the world is entered and placed and given into the heart of this particular class of individuals called the sons of men. And the sons of men here is a class representing priests. Sons of men, these are men born from men. This is the semen of men, or seminary. Think seminary. That's what this class is. And so the author is writing about their experience from seminary and being with and among the seminary trained and living the lifestyle of the seminary trained, of the sons of men. And it is completely aggravating. It's completely aggravating because it is all labor. Their travail is a labor. Their labor is not physical toil. Their labor is a labor of forcing wisdom to work for them, and particular wisdom within the world. And this world isn't the natural world, because this isn't natural people. This is natural ministry. These are ministers. The natural part of this is about ministry, philosophy, religion. So the author is very frustrated with his experience forcing the wisdom within the religious world to work. And that's what this book is about. The error, the sin connected to the religious world.
Knowing Bible is a course for learners wanting to grow closer to themselves and to their Creator. There is a reason why we trust the Bible. There is a reason why the Bible moves us to celebrate it. There is also a reason why we feel hesitant to let the Bible's words satisfy us. Traditional religious theory isn't always satisfactory. Carrying a belief without proof will soon aggravate our thoughts and feelings. Knowing Bible is a course that is designed to wake us up to who and what our belief is. Knowing Bible is for learners that want a living experience beyond conventional religion. Don't let this educational opportunity slip away from you.
So I'm pointing this out to show the idea when it says, "Behold, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me." I'm pointing this out to show the relevance of why that is necessary to read and how we ought to look at it. We're not reading about a literal person being literally born from a literal womb. That's not what this is about. The idea is philosophical, the idea is doctrinal. The prayer of that psalm is that the individual is taken and is conceived from their denominated outlook, from their church, from their religious institution in sin. And the sin that exists therein, in that sphere, in that matrix, is a paradigm linked to the wisdom and to maintaining the labor of the wisdom within the religious world. The illustration of the crucifixion of the living God's chief apostle lets us know what that labor is. When we see that body crucified, we're seeing the crucifixion of a labor. We're seeing the crucifixion of a particular labor. And that particular labor is the labor that the conversation needs to find itself redeemed from. The frustration of that labor, that is the definition of what sin is. Each and every single one of our conversations, it is conceived within the religious world. It is born in iniquity. You, personally, there is no condemnation against the human being initially or primarily from the Bible. The primary issue with the Bible is your devotional conversations condition, is my devotional conversations condition. Because it is how our conversations conscience operates that our human being will follow suit. If our conversation does not know its error, our human being will never receive the correction that it needs in order to know its error. The issue is our conversation, because we are spiritual creatures innately. We live and move and operate by what we feel and by what we perceive to be in a realm outside of us and that we can't see. That's just how things are. That's just how we are. We're humans like this, even though the word human connotes something flesh-based. Our human being is split. And the split, you would think, the human is driven by it because that's what it appears as, but it is the mind within and the spiritual or theological or holistic or devotional rationale that guides the impulse of our human being. It is because this is not well that our human being continues to frustrate its own self. The issue with the Bible is that sin, the idea of controlling the devotional conversation, controlling the religious life, controlling the holistic lifestyle by handwritten religious laws, it falls back as an idea for the human being of government. So as we're training our religious conversation to live in this strict manner, our human being will live in this strict manner. Our human being living in this strict manner will then dish out that same strictness to another, and we will begin to rule our environment and the people around it by the force of conscience that religion has told us is naturally to be given. This is wrong. And it all falls back down to the culture of our conversation. Creating that culture and allowing the cultivation of understanding what this illustration of the crucifixion actually means. This is the change, and another word for redemption is change. This is the change that our conversation needs to go through. As it says in the book of Ephesians, put off your former conversation and be renewed in the spirit of your mind. This is redemption to the Bible. Redemption to the Bible is the redemption of the mind. But from what? From what? The illustration again of the crucifixion says what? The illustration of what goes on in Eden says what? The illustration of the Exodus says what? It is consistent. It is consistent and it is plain. But the conversation really wanting to escape that, the conversation really wanting to better not just its own self, but the human being attached to it, well, that's the conversation that's going to gravitate to such an experience. It is this experience that when we allow our conversation to go through it, we find relief, not only simply to the conscience of our conversation, but also to our human being, which is what this is for. Our human being needs this because on a daily basis, our human being is going through things that we can't solve or it can't solve, but the experience of our conversation can. The authors of the Gospels really get their concept from Paul's gospel. You know, before the Matthews and the Marks and the Lukes and the Johns of the world existed, there was only Paul. There was only what Paul's doctrine was giving. And it's only after Paul that these authors took Paul's concept, and that concept became the foundational core, the accepted core of what the Greek Jewish Christ should be. And so in these narratives, there are different parallels to different Greek mythologies, different Egyptian mythologies, different Sumerian mythologies, and so on. And the issue or the idea of redemption is really drawn from those type stories, ancient folklore, and is placed into their main character. And so we get our idea of redemption of coming from Paul's Christ or coming from Paul's gospel due to the same, and it's placed into a modern context by the authors of the Gospels, but due to their background. We have inherited that same type of Greek mythological culture. An example of where this is found, and I find this completely interesting, and always have, is in the book of John. John chapter 20 and verse 11. John chapter 20 and verse 11, just part of this verse here. John 20:11, but Mary stood without at the sepulchre, weeping. And as she wept, she stooped down and looked into the sepulchre. And then after she is weeping, she then receives a vision. And then after she receives a vision, she receives a sighting. So it is the idea of weeping, or it is as it is here written. Weeping is written to signify an oncoming or something that should take place, resulting to resurrection. So when we see weeping, we ought to know that the individual she's looking for and hoping to observe will manifest. And that's what happens. So why does that take place? And why is that important? Chapter 11 of the Apology of Aristides? The Apology of Aristides. Maybe butchering that. But chapter 11, the Apology of Aristides. Now this is an apology of an individual here taking into account the error of the religions involving gods and worshiping nature. So this individual is making their way to this particular religion where they're bringing up the point of Aphrodite. And this is the recounting of the history of Aphrodite and along with others within it. So chapter 11, the Apology of Aristides. Again, they say of Aphrodite, she had Ares as a lover, and again Adonis, who is Tammuz. Once also Aphrodite was wailing and weeping for the death of Tammuz, and they say that she went down to Sheol that she might redeem Adonis from Persephone, who was the daughter of Sheol or Hades. If then Aphrodite is a goddess and was unable to help her lover at his death, how will she find it possible to help others? And this cannot be listened to, that a divine nature should come to weeping and wailing and adultery. So I'm pointing out this here because we do have in the book of Ezekiel that testifies to Tammuz, the weeping and the wailing, and you can connect Ezekiel 8, the weeping and the wailing that the prophet saw for Tammuz, to the weeping and the wailing that Mary does at the sepulchre. Both are weeping and wailing, but why? I have this here pointed out as to why. The idea was for the belief of the redemption of Tammuz or Adonis from the dead. So when we're seeing Mary weeping, this is a concept that is not original to the authors. This is a concept that's taken from the construct of Greek mythology and of Tammuz, Syrian mythology, which is the Syrian deity. So the idea of redemption here in this concept is being redeemed from the one holding in death, the individual there. Now, this is not reality. This is not real. This is not anything to on a logical scope admire, because this never happened. This never happened. It never will happen. But this is mythology. And when we're seeing this placed into the Gospels, we are seeing mythology placed into mythology, because that's all these things are. But the Gospels are a little bit different, because while they are mythology, underneath them, they still have a Jewish mind, the authors. So they're writing philosophy underneath their mythology, which you really have to discern more than any of the books, or equal to, from Genesis to Malachi. But our idea from redemption comes from this. And this concept, illogical to the Bible's mind.
Our faith is alive. Our belief is a living structure. But what does it mean to have a working faith? What does it mean to have a belief assisting our thoughts and feelings? A Faith That Works is a book informing its reader on how to cultivate an active faith. We usually have to make our faith work. We usually need to do something in order for us to feel like our faith is alive. Is this the right way to handle our devotional experience? Find correct guidance and instruction on how to carry the body of your faith in A Faith That Works.
And so from the previous meeting, the idea of redemption and what our conversation needs to be redeemed from, we again touch on it. The conversation needs to be redeemed from what is handwritten over it. And the conversation needs to be redeemed from the idol over it. And the idol doesn't have to be something physical, even though it is. The idol can also be ideological. So to patiently and to temperately abstain from a handwritten religious experience, and to patiently and to temperately abstain from an idolatrous experience. That means staying away. The conversation staying away from the blueprint of religion, and of, I should say, staying away from the blueprint of devotional philosophy contrary to the mind within the scriptures. But the mind within the scriptures is not with this Tammuz way. The mind within the scriptures is not with this Moses code. If the mind within the scriptures were in this Moses code, the illustration of the crucifixion would not exist the way that it does. If the mind within the scriptures were with the Tammuz way, the illustration that the individual saw in Ezekiel chapter 8 of the weeping and the wailing for Tammuz, that would not be there. But it is there. And it's there to let us know that where we see these things, we have to abstain from them. We see them in the book of John. We see them in Matthew, Mark, and Luke also. But I'm here pointing out John. So we're seeing this in the book of John. When we're seeing this in the book of John, we ought to know that the author is seeing their main character the way that the authors of the mythologies of the Greeks and of the Syrians saw their main characters. The same way that Persephone and Adonis and Tammuz and Aphrodite is seen, this is the same way that the authors see their main character, who is Paul's Christ, that they call Jesus. So this is a figure that is preaching redemption from the same sort of mythological stance here. And the Bible is calling us meaning our conversation, that when we see this, we abstain from it. Because this is not the operation that the Bible's mind gets down with. The redemption that the Bible's mind gets down with is put off your former conversation and be renewed in the spirit of your mind and be created anew within that same mind. The redemption or the change of the Bible is after that the Bible's mind consents to and would have us consent to is the deliverance of our conversations, thoughts, and feelings from everything that I just said. Again, from an experience that is bogged down by the code of Moses, which is handwritten religious law, and that is bogged down by the Aphrodites and by the Adonises and by the Tammuzes and by the weepings and the wailings of the religious world, where we see these things in play, we ought to know that our conversation is in sin. This is sin to the Bible. This is sin to the Bible. This is sin to the Bible's mind. And every single one of our conversations is born in this. Every single one of our conversations is born in this. And that's why I started with that psalm in the beginning. Every one of our mothers conceives us in sin. Every one of our religious institutions conceives our conversation and its thoughts, feelings, actions, and behaviors in what the Bible calls, quote unquote, sin. The Bible's main concern, our conversation's condition, is just this. The issue is us. The issue is us. The issue has to do with us acknowledging what the Bible is advising, which you would think would be simple and plain, but just oddly enough, it is not. That just means that the experience of conviction and of correction, it can't come from a book, and it will never come from a book. It can't come from a human being. It will never come from a human being. It has to come from the conversation, interacting with words and interacting with its experience. When we can allow our conversation to do this, when we can allow our conversation to pass through and to go through the course of learning that the mind within the scriptures is advising, then redemption is nothing at all except a positive experience into a higher education.